Okay, so Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. So I can see, just scanning a lot of the questions from last week. There are a couple of comments and questions. I mean, one that says, I know it's uncomfortable, but feminism has influenced women here in the West to view marriage a certain way and make false allegations in court. So, there are quite, and we spoke about this point, like just, blaming everything on feminism. And as I mentioned, that there's no denying that feminism has had a negative impact in the way a lot of sisters look at marital issues in our religion. But I think it's important that we don't conflate feminism with other things. Sometimes it's just a matter of shahwa and desire, meaning, for example, the point that some people raised in the question section, that false allegations are made in court. I don't know how that's related to feminism, but I think that's more closely related to people following their hawa and their whims and their desires. Right? So that's why all I'm saying is for people just to not lump everything into one corner and say, okay, if a woman is rebellious and she's disobedient, then automatically that's an ideological problem. It's not always an ideological problem. Sometimes what it is just people just have a very weak attachment to the religion, such that disobedience becomes easy for them. And we even mentioned in the time of the Sahaba, there were what Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, he said about how some women in Medina, they were quite authoritative in their marriages, and that's why he was worried that the women of the Ansar would influence the women from the Muhajirin, from the emigrants. That wasn't a case of feminism. People are different, right? So yeah, it's a combination of different factors. Why am I raising this point? Because what I don't want to happen is that, younger brothers, that when they see attitude and behavior like this, they all start accusing sisters of being feminists, and they haven't diagnosed the problem correctly. And when you don't diagnose a problem correctly, right, you can't fix the problem, right? And not only that, if someone accuses you of something and that's not really the case, right, then this only, it only makes the situation worse, right? It only makes the situation worse. I mean, there are some cases where I've seen very ugly cases, for example, where due to a breakdown in the marriage, the sister would accuse the husband of terrible things, right? And it would be taken to court. But that sister's clearly not a feminist. Right? So it's not to do with feminism, but it's to do, it's just a lack of taqwa. A lack of taqwa is it, what will lead a person to forge and falsify information, right? It's a lack of taqwa, right? Bitterness and envy and spite and malice. These are diseases of the heart. Diseases of the heart, right? So this is the way that a lot of these issues need to be treated, rather than just going around just accusing people of falling into isms and different ideologies, right? So just try to develop a more nuanced understanding of the situation. So someone asked about, okay, I know nushuz was focused on intimacy in the class, but what if the wife, what if is there nushuz in other aspects like tabarruj and speaking loosely with men and being rude, etc.? Is that considered to be nushuz? Technically speaking, no, but it's still, it's still a problem, right? If a woman is falling into tabarruj, she's displaying her beauty in an invalid way, and she's speaking loosely with men, and she's being rude. These are all bad characteristics, and these are all bad adab, right? So, but these are things between her and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, it affects the marriage as well if a woman is loose with other men. So, she should be fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with regards to these issues. Can you use this three-step approach as Allah mentions in the Qur'an? Right? Loosely speaking, we can say yes. Right? You should still, because you're meant to give a maw'idha, you're meant to give an admonishment. Right? And if that doesn't work, then you take things further. Right? So this three-step approach isn't just simply related to when a woman refuses intimacy. Right? It can also apply to other important obligations within the marriage as well. And also, if a woman is being extremely disobedient, then this approach can apply. But as I said, you have to stick to the adab and the etiquette of following these steps. With meaning of qawam from the Tafseer, I read it means the husband has the right of discipline and guiding wife on their duties and roles. And this Ibn Abbas and Ibn Jawzi. Absolutely. I mean, there's that falls within what we were saying, right? I didn't want anyone to go away thinking that qawama just relates to financial responsibilities. It all falls under that. Right? It all falls under that. I asked last week, does nushuz... some of these questions are there. I think the English is just... do people... Okay, I think what you're trying to ask is, does the wife lose the right of nafaqah in the case of nushuz? Yes. Right? So if a woman falls into nushuz, then she loses the right of nafaqah, right? But that should be judged not simply by himself. The husband should ideally, in a situation like that, consult a person of knowledge before he makes such a decision. What is the sunnah? Okay, raising the hands in salah, how many times and when? Don't ask what is the sunnah when it comes to raising your hands in salah. Ask what the opinions of the scholars are on this issue. Right? What are the opinions of the scholars in this issue? If you say what is the sunnah, that means you're saying anybody who disagrees with you is going against the sunnah. The scholars differ over raising their hands in salah. They all agree that you raise your hands takbiratul ihram, but they disagree thereafter. Right? So going into ruku', rising from ruku'. Right, in the Maliki, the Shafi'i, and the Hanbali school, it's sunnah to raise your hands before going into ruku' and when rising from it. As you know, in the Hanafi school, this is not considered to be from the sunan of the salah. People might say, well, the evidence is clear. I'm not going to entertain this discussion because it's a long discussion. But out of adab, it's better to ask, and when issues are widely differed over, and between the scholars, it's better to ask what are the opinions of the scholars with regards to these issues. Right? Because if I tell you this is my understanding of the sunnah, I can say this is my understanding of the sunnah in terms of how many times, right, a person should raise their hands. So when starting takbiratul ihram, when starting the salah, when going into ruku', when rising from ruku', and some scholars say when rising from the third rak'ah. Some scholars say that. The issue is mukhtalaf fihi, is difference of opinion. The society and feminism has criminalized this ayah, except for providing. Okay. From the sisters for marriage, I quiz on marriage for this. The women only understand the provision part and ignore the rest, like obedience. I don't know what sisters you've been speaking to. Right, not everyone is like that. All right, not everyone is like that. I think a lot of the sisters I have engaged with, that I have taught, that are my students, wouldn't, deny the obligation of obedience. Right? So don't paint everyone with the same brush. Okay? It's not good for you. It's not good for your future prospects, believe me. Okay? Regarding sisters saying they're worried about brothers being abusive, a lot of times this is used as a smokescreen because they want to reduce husband, right? Okay, I don't understand that. Okay, what's the permissibility to listen to nasheeds and reciting them in congregation? As long as the meanings are good, right? Not a problem, inshallah. Right. Bismillah. So let's start with today's lesson then, and we'll have maybe another QA session after we finish today's lesson as well. So those were questions from last week. I think I missed a couple. There was a couple regarding marital rape and the concept of marital rape. There's a few others I didn't realize I missed as well. The concept of marital rape, right? I mean, you can look at this purely from a legal and technical perspective, right? What does rape mean? Rape means when you force yourself, right, to be, intimate with somebody else without them giving you permission, right? Without their consent, isn't it? Yeah. When you're intimate with someone without their consent. Now, how do we understand the concept of consent? This is an issue, right? At one point, is a person's consent rescinded and taken away? If a person gave consent and then refused, right? These are, very technical points in both Islamic law and in terms of Western law. In our tradition, consent is given when you agree to the marriage, right? Consent is given when you agree to marriage. When you agree to marriage, basically you're saying, I agree to marry you, and I agree that you, meaning the woman says to the husband, that you have right to intimacy with me, right? And this is your right over me. So consent is given. Now, obviously, does that mean, therefore, that the husband, okay, now that he has this haqq, he has this right, what happens if he's denied this right? Does he just force himself upon her? I mean, look to the ayah, right? What is nushuz primarily understood as when a woman refuses her husband, isn't it? That's the primary meaning of nushuz. Right? And by extension, we said by extension, that could mean other forms of general disobedience. So it doesn't say anywhere in the ayah that if your wife refuses intimacy, or if your wife is nashiza, if she's practicing nushuz, then just take your haqq, take your right, force yourself upon her. It doesn't say that, does it? What does it say? فَعِذُوهُنَّ. Exhort them, remind them, admonish them. Right? وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ. And stay away from them in your bed. وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ. And then if that doesn't work, then discipline them. But it doesn't actually give you the option. Now I'm not saying therefore if a man was to use a level of force to be intimate with his wife, right? A level of force to be intimate, and you can interpret that in many different ways, but that doesn't necessarily, you see, he's getting very technical now, do you see? How do we judge these things? But is it really an ideal position to be in when a man has to force himself upon his wife to attain his haqq? And that's your marriage isn't in a good place if it's taken to that level, right? And I don't think people should be asking about, do I have the right to force myself upon my wife if she refuses? I'm sorry, but you've got bigger problems to deal with than fulfilling your shahwa at that moment, right? We need to stop having this tunnel vision way of looking at things, right? It's my haqq, my right. I can, if I want, I can get it however, which way I like. Yani your relationship with your spouse is far greater than that few moments of pleasure. Right? It's a marriage at the end of the day, which is a huge thing. Right? Wallahu a'lam. Right. The issue of wife refusing intimacy to husband is a tricky one in our times, as wife refuses a lot, will lie about menstruation. Again, what are we basing all of this on? Wife, maybe that's your situation, I don't know, right? But again, where is all this generalization, this generalization coming from? I really want to know. Have people gone around like, taking surveys of these issues? A lot of these issues have existed for times, right? People refusing. Okay, can polygamy work here? That's the question, all right? Can polygamy work here? Wallahi, look, again, you have to look at this from a technical perspective. Technically, a person is allowed to marry more than one woman, right? A man can marry 2, 3, or 4 wives. Okay, that's what he's allowed to do. Whether that works for you or not, whether that will solve your problem, it's not for me to say, right? If you find that your wife lies a lot, for example, and says, she's on her menses or she refuses, right? And you think that marrying another woman will solve your problem, that's your solution. Okay. It's not for me to say though, right? It's not for me to say, yeah, go and do it. Because then what might happen is, if I say to you, yes, go and do it, it's your haqq, it's your right. And then your first wife finds out, and judging by the way this person has described this woman, right? She's not going to respond in a very positive way, right? If she's already lying and she's already, refusing, and then she finds out you got married to another woman, how do you think your life will be, right? So, yes, yeah. No.
For example, divorce.
Yeah.
This Western Europe and America.
Mm.
For example, the man is rich or whatever, they have a lot of money, things like that. And some women, Allah Alam, they're doing about the one divorce. They needed money, a lot of money. How is Islam?
Oh, they try to take money after the divorce. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this is another unfortunate thing. The brother's asking that unfortunately what happens a lot in the West is that when divorces take part, then the woman tries to take basically a lot of the wealth of the husband. And from a Shari'i perspective, as you know, when a woman gets divorced, there is actually a fiqhi issue about whether a man should gift his wife something. That's a separate issue though. But even if we were to argue and to take that view that yes, a man should gift his wife with something upon divorce, doesn't mean that she can take half of his estate or half of his wealth, right? So this is another problem, right? This is another a problem that happens, and as a result of the bitterness of divorce and separation. Unfortunately these things happen, right? And this bitterness and can lead to people claiming unrightfully the wealth of others. People need to have taqwa. That's the key thing. People need to have taqwa. They need to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these situations. Fear Allah, and to not allow your desires and whims to overturn a decision and a hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right. Barakallahu feekum. Should brothers go abroad to get better sisters? It's, this is all down to you, right? Everyone is different. Everyone is different. Everyone has their own circumstances. I don't know what it is, but there seems to be some sort of demonization of sisters here in the West, right? You know, if you find that marrying someone from where you're originally from, then go for it if you think that will help you, right? But I think we all, you know, can appreciate that. I mean, what's one of the reasons why people don't like the idea of getting married from someone back home? There's differences in maybe culture and understanding and attitudes. So whilst we, you know, bang on about, you know, Western, you know, Muslimat, right? Whether we like it or not, we are actually Western in many ways. Whether we like it or not, right? We are Western in many ways. The food we eat, the clothes we wear, the attitude, the things we say, the way we respond to things, the way we even think, right? I've spent many years in the Arab world, and one thing I've come to learn is that it's not that we speak differently, that we have different language. People think differently, right? When you embed yourself in a different culture, you realize people actually think really differently, depending on your cultural background, right? And that's something we need to understand, right? So whilst there might be things that are appealing to you from people from abroad, if you're for marriage purposes, right? You still have to understand that, you know, what makes you a person as you are is not just your doctrinal beliefs in terms of what you believe simply as a Muslim. There's a lot more to that. There's the language you speak, the culture, the way you grew up, the traditions, right? The etiquettes, the adab, right? That's what makes you as a person. And ideally you should marry someone who is on a similar wavelength as you, that will think similarly to you, right? And appreciate the things that you appreciate. And that can differ widely from culture to culture and from background to background. So really it's, you know, I'm not in a position to tell a person whether that's a good thing for them to do or not. I've seen people do it and they're very happy. I've seen people do that and they've ended up in divorces, right? So it's absolutely subjective, and it really depends on one's circumstances, and Allah knows best. Right. Okay, I think that's enough from the question. So that's the bulk of the questions done from last week. So today's lesson, inshallah, we will begin. And in today's lesson, we are continuing on with the discussion of problems between husband and wife. So lesson 23, alhamdulillah, this is lesson 23. And we will look at verse 35. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بعد أن أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإن خفتم شقاق بينهما فبعثوا حكما من أهله وحكما من أهلها إن يريد إصلاحا يوفق الله بينهما إن الله كان عليما خبيرا. If you anticipate a split between them, between husband and wife, فَبَعَثُوا حَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهِ وَحَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهَا, then appoint a mediator, a hakam, a mediator, a middle person, an arbiter, from his family and another from hers. حَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهِ وَحَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهَا إِن يُرِيدَ إِصْلَاحًا يُوَفِّقِ اللَّهُ بَيْنَهُمَا. If they desire reconciliation, Allah will restore the harmony between them. This is one way of looking at this part of the verse. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيمًا خَبِيرًا. Surely Allah is all-knowing, all-aware. So after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the previous verse spoke about nushuz and spoke about disobedience and how this disobedience is to be rectified, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then moves on to the next step. So the final step in the previous ayah was darb, was physical discipline. Now if that physical discipline doesn't work and you see that it's not resolving anything, then resort to the next step. Now you need intervention, right? You need intervention, which shows you that intervention comes at a later stage when it comes to dealing with people's problems. As we mentioned last week, sometimes intervention from an outside party sometimes could make things worse, right? And that's why we said there's a hadith which scholars differ over its authenticity, لا يسأل الرجل فيما ضرب امرأته, that a man shouldn't be asked about why he's disciplining his wife. This doesn't mean, again, people can misunderstand this hadith and say, oh, if we hear of any physical discipline or violence in a marriage, we should just turn a blind eye. No, that's not what the hadith means. It means that in the scope where a man is allowed to physically discipline his wife, right, if that was to happen and you know of it, just leave it between them, right? Obviously, if it goes beyond that, and now she's claiming, for example, no, this isn't physical discipline, this is domestic violence, as understood in Islamic terms, meaning, no, this is haram, a haram form of abuse, right? And she thinks she's being abused in a haram way, then, and this is a continuous thing, then of course she should, then matters now that you need intervention. So if things aren't being resolved and the ayah says وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ شِقَاقَ بَيْنِهِمَا, and you fear this, you anticipate a split, a shiqaq. And the word shiqaq is generally understood to mean, is related to the word shiq, and shiq means like when you have a grave, right? When you have a grave, you have a pit, right? A person is put in a pit. This is what you call a shaq, right? As opposed to a lahad, and form of grave. And then another person we put in another grave, a shaq, right? So they're all put in their independent places, right? So the idea here is that every single one of them, fi shiqqin, and every person is in their own corner, right? Everyone is like, so you fear separation. They're in their own corner, and this is due to the adawa, the enmity, and the mubayana, due to the immense differences. Shiqaq can also be related to the word mashaqqa, which means difficulty, whereby everyone is doing something that creates immense difficulty for their partner, right? And so they're always arguing, they're always fighting, they just don't get along with one another, right? And which eventually leads to the shiqaq, which eventually leads to this breakdown of marriage. So if you fear that to happen, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ, and what is interesting here is that here in this verse it uses the past tense, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ شِقَاقَ بَيْنِهِمَا. Whereas when it came to the verse of nushuz, as we looked at last week, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used the present tense, right? وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ. And those who تَخَافُونَ, that's mentioned in the present tense, right? Because there we said that was more to do with anticipation. It's mentioned in the present tense. Here, Allah mentions anticipation in the past tense, and meaning that it's, the nushuz has clearly happened. It's happened now, right? The nushuz has happened. You've realized there's a stage that has gone so far now that you've realized that the shiqaq is basically, it's around the corner. So it's mentioned in the past tense here. So that's why some say, here it's not just that you anticipate it, rather alimtum, like basically, right? It's like that there's going to be shiqaq, right? Meaning things have gone so bad, basically, things are falling apart. What should happen? Allah says, فَبَعَثُوا حَكَمًا مِّنْ أَهْلِهِ وَحَكَمًا مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا. Who is Allah addressing in this verse? When He says, فَبَعَثُوا حَكَمًا مِّنْ أَهْلِهِ, then appoint or dispatch or send for a judge or a hakam from his family, from his side, and a hakam or a mediator from her side. Here, most scholars are of the view this is actually being directed towards the rulers and those who have authority, right? The rulers and those who have authority, the imam, the qadi, right, or a person in a similar position, right? So this is now meaning the matter has gone so far that now the main authorities are involved, and so what the authority does, it realizes that, look, you know, for a person to come and try to intervene and mediate between two people that they might not even be fully aware of, right? They don't know the circumstances, they don't know who's going to be telling the truth, right? So the best thing to do is get people involved that are familiar with both the husband and the wife. They will be more aware of the circumstances and of the mindset and of the attitude of both parties, right? Rather than, the husband and wife going to an imam or going to like a sheikh or a qadi and say, look, judge between us, which can happen, which is not a problem, which can happen, right? But understand the limitations of that. Understand the limitations of that, because then what will happen is that, as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to say, وَلَعَلَّ بَعْضُكُمْ أَلْحَنْ مِنْ بَعْضٍ. Some of you might be more eloquent than others, so I'll judge in favor of them. Right? So at that moment, the woman could be very eloquent, she can put on a show, and, or the husband can be very authoritative and make it seem everything that he's saying is the truth. And so it becomes very difficult to judge. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs those who are in authority to send someone from his family and someone from her family. Right? So here, this is not actually being directed. Now, some scholars were of the view that وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ, it's not really in reference to the husbands or the wives. It's mentioned here in the plural form. And that's why some scholars even said that this وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ, it could be خِطَاب لِجَمِيعِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Yani it's addressing all of the believers. Meaning if people see that, so and so, like you might have a friend or a relative that's going for a marital breakdown, and you see that, right? So now you want to intervene and help them, but before you go and intervene and help, try and understand the limitations when other people get involved. And that's why I always advise both brothers and sisters, more so sisters, right? Because sisters are usually more familiar of their own friends' marital problems than brothers, because I mentioned last week, brothers don't tend to share their marital problems with their friends, even close friends, right? It's just an issue. That's just the way we operate. So what sisters can do is tell their friends of their marital problems, because they want advice, they want to confide in a friend, which isn't a problem, right? But the sister who's on the receiving and listening to the advice has to be careful, because obviously she would want best for her friend, right? But will she be able to really give impartial advice? It can be very difficult, especially considering that the wife might give a biased sort of understanding of the situation, right? And might not realize. So that's why everyone has to be careful when they are giving advice to one another or giving advice to friends and relatives when it comes to their marital problems. Okay? So it's better to get the family involved, and in particular, not just anybody. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَبَعَثُوا حَكَمًا. Right? Send a hakam. And hakam, we've translated here as a mediator or an arbiter. Right? And as you know, mediators, right? To be a mediator is a skill. Right? To be a mediator is a skill. You even have qualifications in mediation. Right? Qualifications in mediation now, right? So it's not an easy thing. Don't think that, I can be a mediator and solve people's problems. You need to have certain skills. And from our perspective, right, a person needs to understand, number one, they need to be God-fearing, right? And they need to have knowledge of Sharia. So they need to have knowledge of like huquq, rights, right? And they need to be God-fearing, knowledge of Sharia, and they should have the quality of being impartial, which is one of the most difficult qualities to have when someone from your own family, right, could be the cause of many problems. But as we know, people tend to become biased when their own blood is involved. This can happen. It's a very difficult thing. And so that's why to be a hakam, you need to have those qualities. You need to be God-fearing, you need to be knowledgeable of Sharia, and you need to be impartial. Right? And I've seen the ill effects of when bias takes place. Right? And I've seen the opposite. Right? I've seen where family members have told their own family members to basically fix up, and they make them realize they're actually the cause for their problems in their marriages, which is a good thing, right? That if you're willing to tell your own sister, your own brother, that you're the actual cause, not your spouse, that shows that that person is not being impartial. They're not just passing judgment purely based upon blood ties and the family line. Right, so فَبَعَثُوا حَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهِ وَحَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهَا. Imam al-Qurtubi, he says about these two people that وَيَكُونَانَ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْعَدَالَةِ وَحُسْنِ النَّظَرِ وَالْبَصَرِ بِالْفِقْهِ. Yani these two people should be people of adala, upright in character, حُسْنِ النَّظَرِ وَالْبَصَرِ بِالْفِقْهِ, and they have a good understanding of fiqh, good understanding of Islamic law. And that's going to be one of the major obstacles today, right? Because, you know, it's rare to find a person who is knowledgeable in fiqh in our families, isn't it? Right? So that's why at times you need to maybe get other people involved. And that's why he said, فَإِن لَمْ يُوجَدْ مِنْ أَهْلِهِمَا مَنْ يَصْلُحْ لِذَلِكَ فَلْيُرْسِلْ مِنْ غَيْرِهِمَا عَدْلَيْنْ عَالِمَيْنْ. If you can't find someone of that caliber, of that nature, then you can appoint one, and other people can be appointed to deal with the issue, basically. Right. So what happens when these two hakam, when these two people, arbiters or mediators, are now involved in the situation? So if the mediator knows that the person from his family, he is in the wrong or she is in the wrong, right, then obviously he should chastise him, he should counsel him, he should advise him, right, in order to remove the darar and the harm, in order to remove the injustice from whichever party it may be from. So as Imam al-Qurtubi, he says, وَيُقَال, and he gives like a practical sort of setup or a practical example of how, you know, what would happen. He says, إِنَّ الْحَكَمْ مِنْ أَهْلِ الزَّوْجِ يَخْلُو بِهِ. So the mediator from the husband side, he will, you know, step aside with the husband and speak to him privately and say to him, look, أخبرني بما في نفسك أتهواها أم لا حتى أعلم مرادك. Tell me, all right, just between me and you, tell me, between me and you, do you want to stay with her? Do you want to stay with her or not? Or do you just want to let her go? Right? I need to know what your intentions are. Like, do you want to stay in this marriage, or do you just simply want to end it? فَإِنْ قَالَ لَا حَاجَةَ لِي فِيهَا. If he says, I have no need for her, خُذْ لِي مِنْهَا ما استطعت وفرق بيني وبينها. Take whatever you can from her in terms of wealth, meaning basically I'm not going to divorce her, but if she wants to separate from me, then she can ask for a khula, which means that she is willing to give back her mahar. So he says to the mediator, take whatever you can from her, وَفَرِّقْ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَهَا, and just, end the marriage between me and her. So if he says this, فَيُعْرَفْ أَنَّ مِنْ قِبَلِهِ النُّشُوزِ, then you'll know he's the problem. It's the husband that's the problem. Now if you've reached this state in the marriage, basically, where everything's falling apart, and he says to you in your ear, to the mediator, I don't want to stay with this woman, right? But take whatever you can of her money, right? From the khula' basically, then you realize he's a problem, right? وَإِنْ قَالَ, but if he was to say, لا إني أهواها فأرضها من مالي, like no, I love her, فأرضها من مالي, and he please her whichever way you can, even me giving her money. ولا تفرق بيني وبينها, on whatever you do, don't split the marriage. Then if he responds in that manner, right, then he's not the problem. This is just a way, right? I mean, this is just an example. وَيَخْلُ الْحَكَمْ مِنْ جِهَتِهَا بِالْمَرْأَةِ وَيَقُولُ لَهَا, and as for the other hakam, the arbiter, from the woman's side, he will say to her, do you love your husband or not? Do you want to stay with your husband or not? If she says, no, I don't want to stay with him, right? End this marriage right now and give him whatever you want, right? From my money, like, give back the mahar, etc. Then right, she's the one, most likely is going to be the cause of the problem. Meaning she's the one that's causing all the problems in the marriage because she doesn't want to stay with him. Right? She doesn't want to stay with him, so she's causing lots of problems. But if she says, no, don't separate between us. However, وَلَكِنْ حُثَّهُ عَلَىٰ أَنْ يَزِيدْ فِي نَفَقَتِي وَيُحْسِنْ إِلَيْهِ, I don't want to separate from him, but just advise him, please advise him, just to, give me my fair share of financial support, and that he be good to me. That's all I want. I want him to be good to me and provide for me. عُلِمَ أَنَّ النُّشُوزَ لَيْسَ مِنْ قِبَلِهَا, then you will know that the problem of their problem is not really her problem. It seems as though the problem is coming from him. فإذا ظهر لهما الذي كان النشوز من قبله يقبلان عليه بالعظة والزجر والنهي فذلك. And so based upon that, right, the two arbiters will come together, right, and they will mention, look, this is the situation, this is what the husband wants, this is what the woman wants. Now both of the arbiters will have a good understanding, the reality of the matter. Remember, these two arbiters, they don't come together with the intention, yeah, I'm going to back you up no matter what happens. You're my relative, you're my daughter or my sister or my brother or what have you, my nephew. You don't go with that mindset. You don't go with that mindset. You go with the mindset of trying to resolve the matter in the best possible way. So if they then come to an agreement and they say, look, we realize what the problem is, okay, the husband is the problem, then both parties will come together, both from both sides, both of the arbiters, they'll sit down with the husband and say, look, the problem's from you. You need to sort yourself out. Right? And when arbiters come from both sides, and subhanAllah, if it's coming from his side as well, he has to concede, unless he's extremely stubborn, right, and doesn't want to listen. And likewise, if both go to the woman and they say, look, both sides, even her from her own side, they say, look, you're the problem, you're causing a lot of the problem, then she realizes, okay, right, if both parties are saying this, then I realize I need to fix up. I need to sort myself out. If they both come to a decision that, you know what, these two are not good for each other, right? They're never going to resolve their problems. And they both decide now the marriage needs to be dissolved. An end needs to be put to this marriage. Do these two arbiters have mediators? Do they have any jurisdiction to end the marriage? This is an interesting mas'ala. Yeah. تفضل. do they have that power to end the marriage? Here, this is something that the scholars differ over. The first view, which is the view of the Hanafi school, and also the view of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, is that these two mediators, they are essentially agents. They're like wakils, right? They're agents, wakil, meaning they are just speaking on your behalf, but they don't have the direct power to dissolve a marriage without the permission of the respective people, right? So the man who's going to speak on behalf of the husband, or the person who's going to speak on behalf of the wife, they don't have the right to say, okay, I'm going to end the marriage, without the permission. Right? And that's a view of many of the Hasan al-Basri, Qatada, and others. The Maliki position, though, on this, and one of the opinions of Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah, is that they actually have legal jurisdiction. They have legal jurisdiction to dissolve a marriage, right? If they see that's the best thing to happen, even if both parties disagree, or one of the parties disagrees, right? And why is this? Because Allah says, فَبَعَثُوا حَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِي وَحَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِي. What is a hakam? A hakam is none other than a hakim. And a hakim has that jurisdiction to dissolve a marriage, right? The hakim has that jurisdiction to dissolve a marriage. So, meaning that their jurisdiction is more than merely islah, right? It's not just islah, yani just to mediate and patch things up. The Hanafi and the Hanbali position, they see these two hakam, these two mediators, as people that just simply, will patch things up. Yurida islahan, if they want to rectify, if they want to fix things, patch things up, yuwaffiqillahu baynahuma. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring them together. Allah will rectify the situation. Right? But in the Maliki school, and according to one opinion, the Shafi'i school, no, their jurisdiction goes beyond islah, goes beyond mediation. It actually has legal jurisdiction. That's why Allah calls them hakam. وَمِن شَأْنِ الْحَاكِمِ أَنْ يَحْكُمْ بِغَيْرِ رِضَى الْمَحْكُومِ عَلَيْهِ. And as you know, a hakim can pass a judgment even if it's not in favor of any of the parties involved, isn't it? Right? A judge will judge regardless of whether the person desires that judgment or not, because that's the authority of the judge. However, some scholars were very, you have Imam al-Tabari rahimahullah, he strongly believed that none of the parties actually have any legal jurisdiction to dissolve the marriage, or furqa, right? And I think that's more of a practical position, especially for us here in the West, because, number one, when we get families involved, can you really say that they fall under, this, they can be characterized as being good hakam, right? Do they have the qualities of adala, of ilm and fiqh and wara and taqwa, right? And secondly, remember, who is the one who appoints these hakam? It's the hakim, it's the main legal authority. Yeah, so the matter gets raised to the qadi or to the hakim, and they say, look, this marriage is falling apart, help us. And so the hakim, the overall judge, or the qadi, he will now appoint two people from the families. This doesn't really happen today, does it? Number one, we don't really have that system. The closest we have are like Sharia courts and imams in masajid, right? And you don't find that they often use this approach. By the way, Al-Qadi ibn al-Arabi, Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, Al-Qadi, the famous Maliki faqih and mufassir, he lamented the fact that where he was, so he was obviously a Spanish scholar. He resided in Andalusia, in Cordoba, and he said that this is a practice that no one follows anymore, right? That, where what happens is where people have this situation, they resort to the Qadi, and then the Qadi then appoints these two people. If only people were to do this. So this was a practice that, he said people don't really follow, right? And that was in his time, and where he was in particular in South Spain during his the time that he lived in. But anyhow, going back to the point. So from a practical perspective, I think the view of Imam al-Tabari and Abu Hanifa and Imam Ahmad, it's probably more practical in the sense that, meaning the issue of giving them legal jurisdiction, that they don't actually have legal jurisdiction. If we open this door to that could cause a lot of problems, right? Because then what will happen is, people will be deciding the fate of people's marriages. It could be your local uncle or your local auntie, or people who aren't very knowledgeable and what have you, and they're just like, marriages are ended by these people, right? And that's why there needs to be that sort of chain of command that needs to be followed. Right. Ibn Ashur, though, he takes, Ibn Ashur, remember, is a Maliki scholar, so obviously he opines and follows a view of the Maliki school, which they do have jurisdiction, and he argues that no, that they clearly do have some sort of legal jurisdiction. They're hakaman, they're not just wakilan, they are actual, they have legal authority. Allah has called them hakam, right? And he says, this is what the most scholars have said. This was the qada of Umar, Uthman, Ali, Ibn Abbas, al-Nakha'i, al-Sha'bi, Malik, al-Awza'i. And he says, and he attributes this to the majority of the scholars. And in fact, he says it's only a qilla, a smaller group of scholars who basically said that they don't have legal jurisprudence, legal jurisdiction. He gives and he tries to give the reasoning as well. He gives, for example, as for the what he calls a ta'if al-qalila, the smaller group who basically say that they don't have legal jurisdiction, their argument is as follows. He says that what their argument is, al-maqsood ba'thu hakamain lil-islah. Firstly, Allah says, فَبَعَثُوا حَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهِ وَحَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهِ إِن يُرِيدَ إِصْلَاحًا, if they want to resolve their issues. Right? So here's about islah, it's about mediation. Right? وَالتَّعْيِينَ الْوَسَائِلَ الزَّجْرِ لِلظَّالِمِ مِنْهَا كَقَطْعِ النَّفَقَةِ عَنِ الْمَرْأَةِ. And so what their role is to zajar, is to try to deter any wrongdoing. So whether it be, for example, if the woman's in the wrong, then they can say basically to the husband, stop spending on her until she starts being responsive and becoming obedient again. وأنه ليس للحكمين التطليق إلا بالرضا زوجين. And they don't have the authority to issue a divorce or dissolve unless they have permission. Right? Okay, he gives the other sort of arguments. Let's move on beyond that maybe. A point that I want to mention here is يُوَفِّقِ اللَّهُ بَيْنَهُمَا. If they want to resolve the issue, right? If they want the matter to be resolved, يُوَفِّقِ اللَّهُ بَيْنَهُمَا. Now how can we understand this phrase, يُوَفِّقِ اللَّهُ بَيْنَهُمَا? Firstly, إِن يُرِيدَ, if they both want to solve the matter, who is this referring to? If they both want, is this in reference to the hakamain, or is this in reference to the spouses, the husband and wife? And يُوَفِّقِ اللَّهُ بَيْنَهُمَا, and Allah will resolve the matter, or Allah will give them tawfiq. Is that in reference to the hakam, the mediators, or the husband and wife? Two questions, right? And they're all open to interpretation. And you find scholars were very clear that this is, well, ihtimal, that these are all possible ways of looking at it. So the first possible way of looking at it is that yurid al-hakaman, if the two mediators seek goodness, and they want to resolve the problem. They don't want to end things, they want to resolve whatever the situation is. Allah will give tawfiq to both of the mediators until they decide, so that they decide what is the best course of action. Yuwaffiqillahu baynahuma. So if the both of the hakam agree that both of them stay together and they advise them both, then that's better for them. Allah will guide them towards that. But if both of the hakam realize these two shouldn't stay together, right, the marriage should be dissolved, that's the tawfiq from Allah. Because sometimes the answer isn't always to stay in the marriage, right? Sometimes separation is actually a good thing, because if they were to stay together, they'll both just be committing sin, because they're harming each other, not giving each other's rights, right? So the tawfiq that Allah gives is not necessarily tawfiq for them for always to stay together. Allah can give them the both of the hakam tawfiq to end the marriage. That can also be the case. That's why I wasn't too certain of the translation where it said Allah will restore harmony between them. Not necessarily. The tawfiq from Allah might be to actually end the marriage. And Allah has given the tawfiq to the two hakam, to the two mediators, to basically guide them to what is better for their situation. This is one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, if Allah wants good for the hakamain, for the two mediators, yuwaffiqillaha bayna az-zawjayn. Allah will restore harmony, between the husband and wife. That's the second view. The third view, if they both want to resolve the issue, refers to the husband and wife, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yuwaffiqillahu baynahuma. Allah will bring them together. Allah will restore harmony. But I think this is unlikely, this view. Why? Well, not unlikely, but maybe not this, maybe strongest position, because if they really wanted islah, do you think it would have reached a stage where they need to get these people involved? They would have resolved the matter by themselves. But still, it can happen. Yurida is, in the fourth way of looking at it, is if the both husband and wife want to islah, they want to rectify the situation, then Allah will give tawfiq to the mediators to judge and to give the correct answer and solution to their problem. These are four ways of looking at it, and all four ways are muhtamal, meaning they're possible ways of understanding this part of the verse. إِن يُرِيدَ إِصْلَاحًا يُوَفِّقِ اللَّهُ بَيْنَهُمَا. Here, Imam Ibn Kathir mentions an interesting story. This is also reported in many other books as well, of tafseer and hadith and history. And this is about the marriage of Aqil ibn Abi Talib, the brother of Ali, Aqil ibn Abi Talib, and Fatima bint Utbah ibn Rabi'ah. Right? So Aqil, the brother of Ali, marries Fatima bint Utbah ibn Rabi'ah. Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, remember, he was one of the leaders of the mushrikeen who was killed in the battle of Badr. Utbah, his brother as well, what was his brother's name again? Utbah, Shayba, right? And the nephew, his brother, I think his name was Was it Khalid? I can't remember. Anyway, so Utbah, Shayba, I think Khalid as well, Ibn Rabi'a, they were killed in the Battle of Badr. Who killed Utbah? Right? It was either Hamza radiallahu anhu or Ali. Ali killed one of them anyhow, right? Meaning the relatives of Ali killed one of the relatives of Fatima. So imagine Fatima radiallahu anha, she became a Muslim, right? She became a Muslim. She was like her father, very anti-Islam, but then she became a Muslim and hasuna Islamuha, her Islam was good. So imagine she's marrying a man who's related to the person who killed her uncle, her brother, and her father. All right. Anyhow, the story of their marriage is quite interesting because she offered to marry Aqil. She was a very well-known, affluent woman, known for her beauty and known for her wealth and known for her eloquence. Very eloquent. So she offered marriage to Aqil. She said, "Tasiru ilayya wa unfiq alayk." You will be mine in terms of marriage, and I'll take care of you financially. This isn't feminism. Okay, for those who were speaking about feminism, right? She was wealthy, right? She wanted to marry him, and she said, "Look, tasiru ilay." In one riwayah actually mentions that you'll be my husband, but you won't share me with anybody else, right? Meaning you only marry me, don't marry anyone else. Wa unfiq alayk, and I'll take care of you financially. You don't need to worry about money. It's a good proposition for him, but I don't think he can't marry somebody else. And again, don't think, okay, because she's making this condition that I don't want you to marry somebody else, somehow she's been colonized by Western feminism, right? Again, it's everything I mentioned before, right? So they get married, and every now and again she remembers her father, Utbah ibn Rabi'a, Shayba ibn Rabi'a, her brother, right? And she would think, they were kuffar, they're mushrikeen, but they died. But she would remember them, right? And she would often say, Ayna Utbah ibn Rabi'a? What happened to him? Where is he? What's going to be his fate in the afterlife? So one day her husband comes in, Aqil, and she says, Ayna Utbah ibn Rabi'a wa Shayba ibn Rabi'a? And so he just said, Ala yasarik fi an-nar in dakhalti. إذا دخلت جهنم. He said, if you enter into Jahannam, you'll find them to your left. She couldn't believe it. Like, what? And she said, what? What are you saying? Because yes, right? على يسارك في النار إذا دخلت النار. And when you go into the hellfire, on your left, you'll find them there. Obviously, they're having problems. Right? They're having problems. And they were both quite old in age as well. Right? They were quite old in age. She became infuriated with this response. Like, how could you say such a hurtful thing? Okay, they're mushrikeen. Right? And obviously there's some background story to all of this. It's just to come out of the blue and said, yeah, your dad's in the hellfire. And, no, there must have been problems beforehand, and that something maybe aggravated him. And so, his tongue was a bit loose at that moment. And so he said what he said, and she became angry. فَشَدَّتْ عَلَيْهَا ثِيَابَهَا فَجَاءَتْ عُثْمَانَ. So, she put her clothes on, and basically she went to Uthman. This was the time of when Uthman radiallahu anhu was Khalifa. Right? And so she went to the Khalifa. Right? So Uthman realized, look, I can't get involved in this. So he acted according to the ayah. فَبَعَثُوا حَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهِ وَحَكَمًا مِنْ أَهْلِهَا. So Aqil ibn Abi Talib, right, is related to Abdullah ibn Abbas. They're related. So he appoints Abdullah ibn Abbas for Aqil, and he appoints Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan for Fatima bint Utbah ibn Rabi'a. And so they come together. Ibn Abbas and Muawiyah, they are the two hakams. See the caliber of the hakam, right? Imagine having, Ibn Abbas as your hakam and Muawiyah as your hakam. So they come together. Ibn Abbas, remember, who's related to Aqil, right? Relating to Aqil ibn Abi Talib. لَأُفَرِّقَنَّ بَيْنَهُمَا. I'm going to end this marriage. Enough is enough. Right? Now, what was the basis for him saying this? I don't know. Right? I'm not going to say it's because of family ties and, what have you. He saw something, right? And he realized, look, this marriage is not going to work. Muawiyah, he said, ما كنت لأفرق بين الشيخين من بني عبد مناف. How could I, end the marriage of two elderly people from the tribe of Bani Abdi Manaf? Right? Because they were still related to one another. They're both Qurayshis, isn't it? Right? It's like, I don't want to split a marriage between such a noble tribe. Right? And they're both old in age. Like, what's the... So they differ amongst themselves, as the two hakam, they differ amongst themselves, but they decide, let's go and speak to them. Right? Let's try and resolve the matter. Let's go to Fatima, let's go to Aqil and try and resolve the matter. They both go to their house. When they go to their house, the door is slammed in their faces, right? And they basically Fatima radiallahu anha and Aqil reconcile between themselves without the need of Ibn Abbas and Muawiyah getting involved. Now imagine they both got involved, what would have happened? That's a difficult situation to be in. Both you have Ibn Abbas and Muawiyah differing from one another. Maybe Allah would have given them a final solution in the end. But what we learn from this story is, firstly, the method that was used to get the hakam involved, right? Which is what? That Fatima went to the Khalifa first. So the hakam really should be appointed by greater authority. It's not just a matter of you appointing someone from your family as you like. Right? Now obviously this happens though. This happens. Like in marital disputes, what tends to happen is when things go sour, you don't know who else to turn to, so you get your family involved. That's fine. You could do that. That's not a problem. But to argue now they have legal authority, that's a separate issue now, to end the marriage. No, that's when you need to follow this hierarchy, right? If you even follow that view, by the way, that these hakam will have legal jurisdiction. But otherwise, what most people do today of getting their families involved, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, but they won't have that legal authority to dissolve a marriage. Yeah, to dissolve a marriage. Because honestly, if that was to be given to most people today, marriages will be dissolved very quickly, right? And people just say, look, without fiqh, without understanding, without basira, it's just usually a hawa and your own personal inclinations. Also, what we learn from this incident is the fact that Ibn Abbas said, لَأُفَرِّقَنَّ بَيْنَهُمَا. I'm going to split their marriage, indicating that he believed he had that legal jurisdiction because he was appointed by Uthman radiallahu anhu. Right? Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. The ayah then says, يُرِيدَ إِصْلَاحًا يُوَفِّقِ اللَّهُ بَيْنَهُمَا إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيمًا خَبِيرًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the all-knowing, the fully acquainted. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ends the verse by giving a severe warning to both husband and wife, and to both of the hakam, to both of the mediators, that they should remember that Allah He has all knowledge and He is fully aware. Yani al-khabir is different, just more than alim. Alim means to know, but khabir means to know bawatin al-umur, yani is to know the hidden affairs. Right? Because when it comes to these matters of passing judgment, right, what tends to have an influence in our decisions are the hidden inclinations, are the hidden preferences, are the biases which don't always show. So here in these matters, remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aliman khabira. Inna Allah kana aliman khabira. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. And that concludes the verse for today. So inshallah we'll open up the floor for questions. Inshallah, as usual, we are on Slido, sli.do, and the code is Tafseer, Tafseer. Yes, sir. Barakallah. Yeah.
What does it mean, like, when you say ending the marriage? So, for example, if the hakim can see that, okay, this isn't working, in ending the marriage, does that mean, like, for example, the woman wouldn't have to pay back the mahar because even if he's ending the marriage, she wasn't choosing wanting the marriage ending? That's the first question.
Yeah. Mm.
If it isn't necessary that they be split, that's the solution.
Yep.
Do we see that here as being like finding the best outcome rather than
Yeah. So with regards to, the brother asked two questions. The first with regards to the nature of the dissolution of the marriage. Whether we argue it's the qadi who dissolves the marriage or the two hakam. What's the nature of this of the ending of this marriage? We call it fasakh in Islamic law, which is different to normal talaq and khula. Fasakh is when the marriage is basically terminated by the qadi, right? And the marriage comes to an immediate end, right? So there isn't a concept of there being a final payment from either party. Basically, the marriage just comes to an end. Yeah. And the second point was the understanding yurida islahan yuwaffiqillah, and if they want islah. Now islah can mean resolving the marriage and both of them living in harmony, but it can also mean islah means to fix something, isn't it? Right? And so fixing a situation might mean ending the situation, ending the marriage, right? So the islah can actually be what word did you choose? The best outcome, yeah. So, the islah could be basically determining the best outcome. So if separation is the best outcome, then so be it. Yeah, if both parties agree to that. Yeah. Yes.
Is there any legal situation where the wife can refuse intimacy with the husband, for example, if he doesn't pay the maintenance?
Yeah, so if the brother asks, are there situations where the wife can refuse intimacy? If the husband fails on his part with regards to maintenance, then yes, right? But again, how is that legally determined? Like, for example, if he falls short in, and this is there is actually some khilaf on this. Difference of my battery's died. I thought, okay, here, if the husband falls short in financial maintenance, he is technically in debt to her, right? If he is in debt to her, then according to some scholars, like in the Hanafi school, they say if he's in debt to her, then Allah says as the principle when it comes to debt, that وَإِن كَانَ ذُو عُسْرَةٍ فَنَظِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ. If someone is in difficulty, financial difficulty, then you have to give them respite, right? You have to give them time to be able to pay, basically. Then the majority of the view are if he isn't paying his and fulfilling her financial rights, then she can refuse intimacy. But as I said, there are final details to this. Is it, for example, that he's delaying payment by 1 day when he normally pays her? Then she said, that's it, I'm not going to give you your right. It's not as simple as that. That's why in situations like that, the woman should consult a person of knowledge and to determine whether that applies to her. It's determined by urf and the customs of the people, right? So it's not that it has to be determined before the marriage. وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Allah says, live with them in a way which is equitable and good. right? So it will be understood by the customs of the people. Like she doesn't have to give like a list of, this is what I expect from the marriage, you need to give me X amount. But according to what is customarily acceptable. Yeah, so it would depend on her background, her upbringing. Like if you marry a princess from Dubai, for example, yeah, you know, she will have very high standards, you know. Allahu A'lam. Okay. Should Muslim men and women give each other a 2-year trial period using protection in marriage, and if it doesn't work, they can separate with no hard feelings? Well, I mean, you know, subhanallah. You know, there's a lot of fear, subhanallah, today when it comes to marriage. You know, like with prenups now and you know, entering into marriage with such negativity is not a good thing, right? Right? It's not healthy for you. You know. Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, if you enter a marriage like that, right, having spent so much money, right, you want some sort of reassurance, isn't it? I guess it's, you know, look, again, these things are not for me to say and give advice to anybody and say yes, you should do this, or no, you shouldn't do this. It really depends on your dynamics, your sort of marital dynamics, and who you are as a person. The nature of your marriage. Maybe you're someone who hasn't been married before, maybe you have experience, maybe you've divorced, maybe, you know, and so it really depends, right? It really depends, you know, if you want to do that. And so it's really down to you, right? And as long as you both agree, right? You both agree. If one party says, no, I don't want to do this, I want to have children, each spouse has their right, right? A wife has a right to have children, and a husband has a right to have children, right? But if they both agree that, look, let's not have children, then you know, from a legal perspective, that is technically legal. Yeah. Ah, yeah. 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 So that's a different topic. The issue of like misyari marriages, like secret marriages, and yeah, we've spoken about that before, right, at length. This is different. Here, I mean, the assumption here is that this is a normal marriage, a public marriage. You know, everything's been given, a mahar has been given, they live together. We're not talking about temporary marriages here. You know, temporary marriages, or, you know, misyari marriages, we've spoken about that in the past, and we said, you know, these practices don't fall in line with the ethos of marriage in our religion. But if it is a normal, proper marriage where it's been declared, it's been announced, there are witnesses, there's a walima, everyone knows, they're living with each other, it's just there is this fear that things might not work out. Now, they don't want to separate having children into the equation. Look, it's down to them. I mean, it's not something that I would encourage per se, right? Because I think entering into marriage with such fear isn't a healthy, you know, isn't a healthy position to be in. Wallahu a'lam. I don't understand the third and the fourth way of looking at it. How is it different to the first two? Because yurida, number 3 and 4, is in reference to the husband and the wife. Yurida islahan, yani the third and the fourth interpretation is that that's addressing the husband and wife. If they, meaning the husband and wife, want reform. The first and the second way, yurida, is in reference to the hakamain, to the two mediators. Can the mediator be a man or a woman? It can be. There's no condition that it has to be a woman. Has to be a man. Would couples counseling apply for verse 35? Well, no, not from the perspective of from a legal jurisdiction. So a counselor won't have a legal jurisdiction to end a marriage. That's by agreement. But the notion of, and the other thing is the counselor won't be, you need to have two people in the situation, right? One from each side. Having a third party as a counselor, that's a separate issue. That's just going from marriage counseling, which is fine. If you want to do marriage counseling, that's not a problem. How do we deal with a situation where a man did darb in the right way, but the woman is falsely claiming domestic abuse, and that you went too far? Lying to courts, basically. How do you solve that problem? This is lying and making false accusation is haram, and this person is accountable on the Day of Judgment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالظُّلْمُ ظُلُمَاتِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. Injustice will be darkness on the Day of Judgment. It has to be resolved in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Would you say that Allah prefers reconciliation? And can you explain the hadith that Allah dislikes divorce? Well, firstly, the hadith, some scholars say, is weak. The most despised halal to Allah is divorce. Some scholars say there's actually weak hadith. And secondly, they say the meaning is not always correct. Right? Meaning, in abghadul halali ila Allah at-talaq. Yani the most despised thing to halal thing to Allah is talaq. We can, even if we argue it's authentic, we can say yes, if the situation doesn't necessitate talaq. Right? Then for you to have talaq over a small issue, that's ridiculous. Right? It doesn't make sense. Right? There you can say, talaq is wrong. Right? If it's over a small issue. Right? Subhanallah, not long ago, a sister called and she said, I'm thinking of, asking for separation. I said, why? He said, my husband, he's a good man. He prays, he fasts Mondays and Thursdays. He's good to the children. We've been married for like 25 years. We have X amount of children. But he sent some flirtatious messages to his colleagues at work. They were a bit loose. So I want to end the marriage. I was like, whoa. I was like, I didn't say that, but in my mind, I was like, you really want to end 25 years of marriage? You have 4 or 5 children together because of a sin. This is a sin, like it's a shortcoming. And she said, he hasn't committed zina. He won't commit zina. I don't believe he'll ever commit zina. But he spoke to these women in this inappropriate way. And I thought, subhanallah, to ask for divorce like that. No, this is an imbalance. This is not judging things you're not judging things correctly here, right? I'm not saying it's a light thing that he's done. No, it's a sin, it's a sin. But to end a marriage based upon that, subhanallah, that would be, then we could say abghadul halali ila Allah at-talaq, the most despised halal thing to Allah in this context, right? So really, yes, of course, reconciliation is always a good thing. Right? Reconciliation is always a good thing. And if it's possible to attain, always go for that. Right? But there are some times where, where things can't be reconciled. And parting ways might actually be the better answer. I heard something like divorce shakes the arsh of Allah. Separation is a big issue. The devil, when he is able to influence people's decisions and he separates between the husband and wife, the shaitan considers this an amazing thing. I'm sure you all know the hadith where shaitan, he will sit and he will speak to his foot soldiers and ask them, what did you do today? One will say, I made this person commit that sin, and I made that person commit this sin. But then one will say, I came and I split between a husband and wife. And he said, anta, and you're the one who'll be, you're the good one. You're the one who's, will be close to me, right? So it is a huge thing, right? The separation. But as I said, sometimes, divorce is a good, to be honest, is a good solution, right? Because if what happens is, if they stay together, they end up committing sin because they're just wronging each other all the time. If it's reached that situation, maybe parting ways it's a better thing. What happens to the mahar if fasakh takes place? She keeps her mahar. when attaining khul'a, does everything need to be returned? Gold that was gifted and cash for mahar. It depends. If the husband says, I want all of the mahar back, right, then he can demand that, right? And if he asks for more, they're subject to khilaf whether he's entitled to that or not. I've heard from a sheikh who deals with mediation, many sisters come in with tears and emotions and false claims. How does a mediator deal with this? Not to be biased. It's a difficult thing. Not to be emotionally swayed is a difficult thing. I remember one sheikh whenever because when you deal with mediation, both parties tend to try to please the mediator to make them seem as though they have a moral standing and a particular moral standing and upright and what have you. So one person kept on saying to the sheikh, Jazakallahu khairan, and making dua for the sheikh all the time, and he says, don't do this, don't say Jazakallahu khairan to me. Right? Meaning, he's not saying it's wrong to do that, meaning he was trying to say basically, don't try and win over my heart, right, with these words, right? That's why from a legal perspective, the qadi has to be quite cold, right? And that's one thing that a lot of sisters might complain about, is that the judge or the qadi is not being empathetic enough. You have to understand his position, right? He doesn't want to be swayed emotionally by any party, and so he has to, be reserved in the way that he is emotionally engaged with any given situation, right? So understand that, when you go to mediation, right, you might find the sheikh or the imam to exhibit a certain personality or character. It's not that that's how they are naturally like, or it's just that they have to be very careful, right? Custody is another issue. Let's not open the door to that at the moment. Right. I'm hearing a huge number of cases, and female therapists and counselors are encouraging sisters to divorce and to hate their husbands and claiming everything is abuse. Yeah, people need to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The thing is, obviously, when you seek support, right, try and understand that you should try to get support from someone who has a good understanding of the situation. Your friends, you might think, and people who are close to you will have a good understanding of the situation, but remember, they might not have knowledge of reconciliation. They might not have knowledge of the fiqh of marriage. They might not have sound knowledge on huquq, on rights, and also they might be biased because they're your friend at the end of the day, or someone who's close to you. That's why when giving advice to friends, when it comes to the marital situations, a person has to be very careful. Yeah. If a husband demands mahar back for khula and she refuses and still breaks the marriage, on the day of Qiyamah, will she be in debt to pay back to him there? Well, there's not going to be much use of that mahar there in the afterlife. But in terms of demanding your haqq, right, and seeking justice, you can seek justice on the day of judgment. Right? وَلْيَعْفُوا وَلْيَصْفَحُوا أَلَا تُحِبُّونَ أَن يَغْفِرَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. Try to learn the quality of sometimes وَأَن تَعْفُوا أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى. Right? For you to overlook is closer to piety. Don't you want Allah to forgive you? But anyway, that's your haqq. If someone has wronged you, at the end of the day, you can seek justice on the day of judgment. Yes, you have a question? Yeah. What's that? Sorry? Yeah. 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 So if the mahar is overdue, and during that period, there's fasakh of the marriage, then yes, he still owes her. Yeah, because he's indebted to her. So that debt will still remain even if the marriage has been dissolved. Yeah. How would you advise practically stage how to deal with marriage disputes the best way? That's to be honest, it's a huge topic. right? And there are many facets to that, and I think that requires a lecture in and of itself. Okay, I know we shouldn't really quote rights that much, but unfortunately with our times, a lot of women don't really know their husband's rights or agree with it. Okay, I don't know what circle of people you associate with, but if that's the case for you, then Allahul Musta'an. Yeah. Right. Okay, so I think that kind of answers most of the important questions here. Right, this is interesting. I used to be a feminist and still have feminist views due to my environment. How do I get rid of these views and follow Islam properly? It's hard to leave. Well, firstly, may Allah bless you, whoever wrote this, to realize that they were upon error, and to realize that they were believing in things which were not correct. With anything in our religion, when you realize that you were once believing in something which wasn't correct and following our teachings in Islam, learn the correct way, right? So educate yourself. That's the key thing, right? Be inquisitive with everything that you come by. Be inquisitive about your own positions of things, right? So ask yourself, do I really believe what I believe in? Is it really correct? Do I need to reevaluate my positions on things? And that's always important. So be honest with yourself. Don't say, no. What I believe is definitely the truth, and I'm never going to budge from what I believe in. Be open-minded, right? Be open-minded. Say to yourself, you know what? Maybe I have been influenced in a wrong way. Maybe I have been influenced by corrupt ideas or ideologies. Maybe I have a poor understanding of something Islamically even, right? So sometimes it's not just, people that realize they've had poor understandings due to foreign influence. Maybe as a Muslim you might realize that, I was actually understanding things wrong, even Islamically, right? So always be, open-minded in that sense. Yeah. Okay, so these are more, more specific problems. Khalas, we will end there for today, inshallah. I'm sorry if I didn't answer your questions, but it is getting late, so we'll conclude there for today. Jazakumullah khairan, subhanaka wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.